questions. I have Norway, France, and the World Bank next. Norway.
Thank you, Chair. And a warm thank you also to the ministers here and in Monrovia for sharing your analysis and plans. That is indeed much appreciated. I also want to thank the briefers. My message, ministers, is to express the support of Norway for your government's national development plan and its peace-building priorities. I want to congratulate the Liberian government on a comprehensive and ambitious plan for the coming 5 years. The PAPD relates to and builds upon previous and existing strategies, including the Sustainable Development Goals. Improved roads and energy are essential in order to connect and reach all parts of the country. This will increase the possibility of private sector development and job creation. Social sectors like health and education are also key in order to secure a pro-poor policy. The Resident Coordinator's Office plays a key role in Liberia. I trust they serve as a good advisor and sparring partner to the government and serve as a platform for dialogue between the government and stakeholders. I'm glad Norwegian support has contributed to strengthening the analytical capacity at the office, providing useful insight and information in order to sustain a peaceful development in Liberia. As the ministers have addressed, fundamental problems that fueled the two civil wars are still present, and peace remains fragile. Limited capacity of key justice institutions, corruption, and high levels of poverty are some of the concerns. I commend the efforts to address all these aspects. Mr. Chair and ministers, let me once again reaffirm Norway's support for Liberia, for the work of the Peacebuilding Commission, and your relentless work for the Liberia Configuration Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Norway. I have France, and then we'll go to the World Bank, representative in Monrovia, and then I have the ambassador of Morocco here. Germany have asked for the floor, as has the European Union, and then Colombia, and then unless there are more speakers here, I would again just give the floor back to Monrovia, and maybe Jakub, you can manage the request for the floor on your side before we sum up and close the meeting. So now, France.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je souhaiterais pour ma part insister sur deux points qui semblent essentiels à la France sur le dossier du Libéria. Le premier, c'est de dire qu'il est important que la communauté internationale situe son soutien au Libéria dans la durée. La MINUL a été un vrai succès en accompagnant efficacement le Libéria dans la sortie de la guerre civile, et je crois qu'il y a un consensus pour dire qu'il était crucial que son départ ne marque pas un coup d'arrêt dans la mobilisation internationale en soutien au Libéria, mais plutôt une évolution vers des outils qui soient plus adaptés aux besoins actuels de la population libérienne. Nous pensons qu'il est aujourd'hui possible de dire que ça a été le cas, et qu'il n'y a pas eu de choc de transition au Libéria, et cela doit tous nous encourager à poursuivre nos efforts de mobilisation en faveur de ce pays qui, comme cela a été dit, est encore fragile. La France y prend sa part, à travers notamment le décaissement d'une aide budgétaire de 5 millions de dollars en fin d'année dernière, ou encore à travers le lancement de plusieurs projets de soutien à l'emploi des jeunes pour un montant de plus de 15 millions de dollars de subventions sur les 2 prochaines années. Le deuxième point, c'est de dire qu'il est tout aussi important que la communauté internationale coordonne ses efforts pour garantir leur efficacité. Je crois que la définition par l'autorité libérienne d'un nombre limité de priorités structurantes joue un rôle décisif à cet égard et a vocation à nous servir à tous de boussole. L'accent qui est notamment mis sur le renforcement des infrastructures et de l'initiative privée nous semble absolument essentiel, et nous étudions actuellement la possibilité de financer un autre projet de développement au cours de l'année 2019, où l'Agence française de développement est susceptible d'apporter la plus grande valeur ajoutée au regard de l'intervention des autres partenaires. Et nos premières évaluations nous conduisent à cibler le secteur du développement urbain en pleine concertation avec les autorités libériennes. Je vous remercie.
Merci beaucoup. I'll pass the floor now to the representative of the World Bank out of Monrovia. So the floor to you.
Your Excellency, Ambassador Skut, dear colleagues, honorable ministers around the table and in New York. So I'm really delighted to be here and to address you on behalf of the World Bank. So I have actually three thoughts that I want to share. First of all, I would like to say that I share the statements that have been already made here about the fragility of the country. So yes, there are successes, so there are achievements, and we are all proud of whatever we see on the positive side of the coin in Liberia. But at the same time, we remember on a daily basis, working here on the ground, that the country is fragile, the society is fragile, the economy is fragile, the social landscape is fragile. And I want to say that this is a thought that always stays in the back of our mind whenever we design any program or project on intervention. So that's the first thought that I wanted to say. The second one is that we are really proud to see the PAPD as a joint product. And we all contributed one way or another, but the ownership is with the government. The government believes in the pro-poor agenda, so they do believe that whatever is done by all of us, it has to be tackled down to the most poor and vulnerable in this society. So the third thought that I wanted to share is that there is a very ambitious reform agenda ahead of us. It is very much clear, so that whatever the money are mobilized, whatever the funding we will be able to mobilize, around the table, in all the capitals, present here or not present here. So these money should be used efficiently and effectively. So that's the key point. So we have to mobilize ourselves and to work closely with the government, with each of us, so to make sure that this money are reaching out to those who are waiting for this support in the faraway villages or in urban settlements that are poor, or to people who are deprived from the basic services in health and education. Those who are coming to school and they are not seeing their teacher in the school. Those who are willing to contribute to economic development. Those who are willing to work, but they don't have tools, they don't have means. And that's why some of our interventions and projects, like in Youth Opportunity Project, I was really happy to listen to the presentation, to the speech by President Weah when he was talking about this Youth Opportunity Project. Even if we reached out to 15,000 people today, youth, who are actually, maybe there are many others who are dependent on the income that will be derived from the activities where we all jointly, are supporting this youth, because there are families around them. So even if we reach out to 45,000, 50,000 people, it's already 1% of the population, and these people will be better off tomorrow. So my third thought I want to share with you is that on the World Bank side, we prepared the country partnership framework, which will it was endorsed by the board of directors in November last year. This document is very well aligned with the PAPD document, and it is also well aligned with the peace building effort, our joint effort, to address some of the factors of fragility. Because this document is built on three pillars. One is about transparency, accountability of the public sector. It's about enabling environment for the private sector to grow in this country, for the private sector to provide jobs and income for people. The second pillar is about human development. It's about human capital. It's about maternal and child health. It's about education. It's about jobs and skills that would allow young people to find these jobs in the market or create these jobs for themselves. And the third pillar is about narrowing down the gap between different settlements in Liberia, between rural and urban areas, between deprived from any connectivity areas in the southeast and the Monserrato County, which is around the capital city of Monrovia. We do see the difference in poverty profile, in access to services, and this is the thing that needs to be addressed, in order to provide equal access to all the services that could be seen, as a benefit for the country. And we do believe through all these efforts, the factors of fragility will be addressed. And again, I want to stress, that Jakub was talking about the preventive strategy. I do think that we have to do efforts to address that. And of course, in terms of the reform agenda, we are absolutely happy to see that the working group on business environment will start working soon. And again, so they will look at the most binding constraints to the private sector development. What needs to be done for the private sector to pick up and to be the main driver of growth in this country? Again, jointly, we are able and we are capable of helping the country. Yes, it's not an easy task. It's a very complex situation, but every day counts. If we can say that today we did something that contributed to the positive delta, so this day counts. And I do genuinely believe in this principle. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Madam, for that intervention. I think we understand the fragilities that you stress, but I think it's very encouraging to hear that the World Bank, such an important player, is aligned in its work with the plan that has just been presented to us today. And I think that responds to some of the questions raised this morning. Thank you very much. Germany.
Thank you, Ambassador, for convening this meeting, and thanks to all the briefers and the ministers here and in Monrovia for their briefings. Germany would like to commend the government of Liberia for the presentation of its development plan. The Pro-Poor Agenda for Prosperity and Development Plan impressively spells out the government's vision to address the tough challenges Liberia is still facing, despite noteworthy progress over the years. While Liberia is progressing impressively on its path to economic development, we believe it is imperative to not lose sight of eradicating potential conflict factors through tackling inequality, promoting reconciliation, improving trust in institutions, and strengthening access to the justice system across the country. The PAPD, and in particular its pillar sustaining peace, acknowledges this challenge and is therefore a strong and very positive signal. Germany, in close cooperation and coordination with our international partners, stands therefore ready to continue to work and support the government of Liberia to address these challenges. Germany's cooperation with Liberia is multifaceted and goes back a long way. It extends to various sectors such as health and education and infrastructure and energy and some others that have been mentioned before. And we are therefore looking forward to continuing this cooperation through a partnership that is based on the needs on the ground, but also on transparency and predictability and proper governance. On the issue of transitions, transitions after the presence of peacekeeping missions are challenging in many ways. We've heard this many times before. Too often the focus of the international community moves elsewhere too fast. Underlying issues that ultimately stand in the way of development and prosperity remain unaddressed, and a challenge to both the host country as well as the remaining UN presence. We therefore welcome a continued strong engagement of the United Nations in Liberia. The past months have shown that a continuation of the good office's role of the UN in Liberia, especially by the resident coordinator, remain not only useful but also imperative. And I say this especially with regards to the role of prevention that has also been mentioned by others before. Also, the engagement of the PBF in Liberia has been essential for supporting the national peacebuilding process. The provision of the expertise needed for political analysis and the implementation of the peacebuilding plan after the closure of UNMIL continue to require our sustained attention. And on the PBC, we are very convinced that the PBC, under the leadership of Sweden as the chair for this country configuration, can play a very important role in accompanying Liberia in its efforts to work on these root causes of conflict and create the conditions that are necessary for a sustainable peace. Thank you.
Thank you very much. European Union, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Let me, in my turn, address a warm welcome to the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Liberia among us today. Thank you very much for your presence, and a warm salute as well to the colleagues and the ministers in Monrovia. As was just said by the Ambassador of Morocco, it's true that Liberia has come a long way in the last 15 years since the end of the war, and this is recognized by all. The democratic and peaceful handover of power following the elections in 2017 and the UNSMIL's withdrawal completed in March last year were possible to the sustained effort of the Liberian people and authorities, and this has to be commended. The EU has been accompanying Liberia in its transition process as a committed political and development partner of the country. And we today encourage Liberia to continue to face the challenges that lies ahead and to consolidate the peace, stability and development. Liberia is a clear example of the importance of the prevention and sustaining peace approach. And the EU as such will continue to help Liberia consolidate democratic and inclusive governance, responsible and accountable institutions, social cohesion, the rule of law, human rights, the empowerment of women and youth, and the provision of the basic services and infrastructure. We will support Liberia's effort to foster a robust and broad-based economic growth which can generate jobs and income to the Liberian people and enable business and investment for the private sector to thrive. And as such, let me acknowledge the effort of the Liberian government led by President Weah in his first year in office to address the most compelling needs of the population and its focus on basic services and infrastructure like roads and energy. And we welcome the recent approval of the Land Rights and Local Government Acts, which will be instrumental in addressing some structural challenges Liberia still faces. We acknowledge as well the Pro-Poor agenda for prosperity and development that has been adopted, and we will support it. In fact, most of our current development assistance is already oriented towards the completion of the Pro-Poor agenda for prosperity and development. And we will align our future development interventions with this agenda, with the remaining funds of the 11th European Development Fund or with the next cooperation portfolio when the post-Cotonou negotiations will come to an end. We've already started a dialogue with the government to move forward on the implementation of the 4 pillars of the Pro-Poor agenda for prosperity and development in the most effective and efficient way and under the leadership and ownership of the Liberian government. We believe it will be important to establish clear priorities, ensure sufficient budget including government's own resources, and set a well-elaborated monitoring and evaluation framework. And as such, a matrix of the cooperation projects that we, the EU, but with our member states, will continue to unfold. This matrix will be updated to ensure the alignment with the agenda for prosperity and development, as well as coordination and complementarity among us. The EU delegation in Liberia, as well as the member states present in the country, like France, Germany, who just took the floor, Ireland, Sweden, the UK, will continue to work alongside with the UN country team, the African Union, the ECOWAS, and other diplomatic missions to help address the challenge that Liberia face. And let me conclude by reasserting our strong engagement to work constructively with the Liberian government through our regular political dialogue to implement further our cooperation project. Thank you very much, and thanks to Liberia.
I'm glad to see that we're back with contact with our friends in Monrovia. I have one more speaker here, and that is Canada.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and let me convey my ambassador's regrets. She had to leave to deliver a statement in ECOSOC, and apparently they are less successful in managing the speakers list than we are. Canada would like to welcome the Honourable Minister of Foreign Affairs for joining us, and thank him for joining us here in New York, and thank the colleagues, the ministers and the colleagues in Monrovia. We would like to congratulate the government on its pro-poor agenda for prosperity and development, and particularly the inclusive process and the inclusive manner by which you've pursued it, which is obviously attested to by the fact that you have 3 ministers presenting it and civil society. We also appreciate the very frank nature in which the ministers have shared the challenges and opportunities that Liberia faces. just a few points that we would like to highlight. We share a lot of the analysis that's already been stated. We see in many ways some of the underlying root causes of the conflict still remain to be addressed, particularly challenges to good governance and rule of law. We also would like to highlight the importance of economic inclusion, especially for women and girls and disenfranchised youth. We would really like to commend the work of the UN country team and the resident coordinator, former DSRSG, for the role that they have played in helping ensure a fairly smooth transition in what was, as everyone has acknowledged, a very complex drawdown from peacekeeping to a UN country team presence. We share the views that it is important to ensure the country team has the continued capacity to support the residual peace-building tasks that were identified in the peace-building plan. We'd particularly like to welcome the developments that have been made on land rights and local governance. We look forward to learning more about your plans for implementing those. And we would note, in our experience as chair of the Sierra Leone configuration, so many similar issues that have remained as kind of the core of the residual challenges in Sierra Leone around land tenure, around decentralization and local governance. And we think there might be an opportunity here in pursuing more of a regional approach to share some lessons and best practice. Finally, we would really like to welcome the focus on engaging the private sector. In our view, the long-term diversification of the economy and future growth will depend on these types of partnerships, and we hope that collectively as the PBC we can work to find ways to engage the private sector more creatively throughout all of the configurations, and we stand ready to support all of your efforts, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Canada, for that. I'd like to now, Jakub, I'd like to pass the floor back to Monrovia. There's been a few questions put to both to you, Jakub, and to the ministers, I believe. And I also, of course, take note that there is a very high level of participation on your side. So I'd be most happy to invite any ambassador or representative that wants to add to the conversation on your side. But it's a little bit difficult for me to run the meeting from here since I can't really identify everyone around your table. So Jakub, if I may hand over the running of this section to you. And provide the opportunity for everyone who wants to contribute over from Monrovia. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ambassador Skoog. We have quite a presence here on this side, and that's why I think brevity will be much appreciated for the sake of time. I think most of the responses, time should be given to the government officials present here. But then, of course, the floor is still open for those. I have the African Union.
Thank you very much, Jacob. As you already mentioned, we are going to be very brief because for us here, time is already very well gone. I would like first and foremost to thank the conveners, the PBC, for convening this meeting. As you very well know, our own agenda here, our mandate in Liberia is not much different from that of the Peace Building Commission. We're here to monitor not only the progress that has been made in the peacekeeping process, but also equally in the challenges that this country is going in the economic front. Because with peace goes with economy, the economy goes with peace, so either way. Liberia, I have to say, a lot has been said about the still fragility of the country, and that I have to endorse as a representative of the African Union. The country is still very fragile. A lot of challenges are faced by the country. So we are only saying that we were talking the talk. I hope we walk the walk with Liberia to bring prosperity and sustain the peace that has been hard-won in this country. Our mandate, as I said, is not very much different from the Peace Building Commission, but equally, we monitor also the economic development strides that this country making, and try to highlight that to partners to help Liberia in that direction. Liberia is moving in the right direction as far as the African Union is concerned, and we would like partners to help Liberia move in this trajectory. It's very, very important. And equally, we don't want to lose sight of Liberia's strategic location, geographic location in the Mano River Union Basin, surrounded by still very fragile states, Sierra Leone, Guinea-Conakry, and Cote d'Ivoire. And a peaceful and prosperous Liberia will go a long way, not only to bring peace to Liberia, but to the Mano River Union Basin. We should not lose sight of the fact that the 14-year war that devastated this country spread quickly to the other Mano River Union countries. We also had Ebola, which easily spread to these other countries. So it is equally important, if not more important, to have a stable, prosperous Liberia. And that goes for members, donors, to continue to assist this country. The document, the ProPART document, is a wonderful document prepared by this government. And we can see a lot of energy in moving this document, in implementing what is stated in this document. We are here on the pillar 3. You can wrap it up. Okay. There's so much to be said about Liberia, and we are so more passionate to see that this country moves forward, that we hope and pray that we shall all support the ProPART document, which we consider to be a very brilliant document and in the right direction for the peace and prosperity of this country.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Kamara. Ambassador Ajishumu of ECOWAS.
Thank you very much, Yaku. Thank you. Ambassador Cook, I join other colleagues to thank you for convening this meeting, as well as to thank members of the PBC for your commitment, towards helping Liberia. It has been said eloquently, the challenges that this country has gone through, and which is still going through, in terms of being a highly challenged country economically, in terms of fragility that has been said, particularly among other ECOWAS member states. And this is the reason why we're making this advocacy. And when you look at this document, which we are speaking to directly, it aligns, with all the regional instruments, with all the global instruments. And more importantly, the 4 pillars equally focuses on the regional integration as well. So for us, for ECOWAS, we welcome it, and we will do everything possible to support it and to advocate for support globally. It's a beautiful document. If you look at the Pillar 1 and Pillar 2, which the minister, articulated in terms of power to the people, in terms of job creations and economy, access to justice is also well captured. One of the things that we plan to do in the next 6 weeks is to bring our Community Court of Justice to Liberia, to strengthen the judicial sector, and of course also the private sector. The private sector in Liberia is very weak. The minister alluded to this. Equally to diversification of the economy. So Liberia needs all the support it can get to be able to implement this important national development plan. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Ajishumu. I don't see any more takers. I want to quickly respond to a question that I believe was addressed to the UN, maybe here or in New York, but let me start here, and that is how do these different organs work together? The PAPD is the overall framework as far as Liberia is concerned, and everything that we're trying to do is within that. And that includes the UNDAF. The UNDAF is simply the collective effort of the United Nations system contributing to the realization of all the goals of the National Development Agenda. So these are the frameworks that are aligned and will be even more aligned as we now prepare the new generation that will kick in of the UNDAF, that will kick in on the 1st of January this year. The LMPTF, and that's the Liberia Multi-Partner Trust Fund, is a funding facility, and it actually will serve both the bigger framework, and that is the PAPD, through the national window, as well as the United Nations Development Assistance Framework, supporting UN and partner efforts deliver on programs that will indeed contribute to Liberia's pursuit of the SDGs and the 2030 Agenda, but also peace consolidation. The Secretariat of the Trust Fund, the Liberia Multi-Partner Trust Fund, as well as the Secretariat for all the ongoing joint programs funded by the Peace Building Fund is one. It's one consolidated secretariat. In fact, it reports to the Minister of Finance and to the resident coordinator, and that is how the synergy and cohesion between all that is being done is assured, including the quality of what is being delivered. Currently, as we speak, the portfolio coming through the Trust Fund or directly from the Peace Building Fund is about $20 million. These are ongoing programs in Liberia as we speak, funded, I would say, mainly from the Peace Building Fund, even if the last $5 million that has been mentioned here, and which was recently approved, is coming through the Liberia Multi-Partner Trust Fund, but the source is really the Peace Building Fund, and the volume is about $20 million, $19.3 million to be precise. All of this is monitored by a steering committee that is co-chaired, and that is also configured or comprised of membership from the government of Liberia, from civil society, but also from the development partners present in Liberia. I want to thank Norway for having helped us go through 2018 post-UNRWA. It was the Norwegian contribution that actually allowed us to retain capacity. But I'm very hopeful for 2019. I know there are a number of countries that are seriously looking, and I think we are very close to those countries making contributions that will help us maintain this strengthened resident coordinator's office in Liberia in the year 2019, a critical year and a very important one. Because as the Minister said earlier, the transition is not an event, it's actually a process that is still ongoing. With that, Ambassador Scoop, I'm going to maybe request the Minister of Finance to take the floor.
Well, thank you, Ambassador Skoog and Yakub. Time is much spent. Let me thank all of the ambassadors for wonderful comments. And I think I'll try to, in a scattered fashion, wade through some of the important themes that were sounded out in the remarkable comments. The first thing is I would like to set the stage for the context of scaling up resources for Liberia's support. It's one thing for a society to go through conflict, for UN peacekeepers to help and all partners to help, and then for that country to normalize, and then for the troops to leave, so that the country stands on a foundation that is stable. That transition didn't happen in Liberia. So enormous flows of aid came in, unmailed spending came in, and part of the challenge we're facing now is what I call soft money. A lot of soft money flowed in here. Now, after that transition, while it was happening, you had the commodity collapse. So you have multiple shocks for the country. So development happened, development aid, UN troop spending, then the Ebola hit, then commodity prices collapsed. And then everybody leaves, aid flows decline, and the country then is expected to stand on that new normal. It is not the same normal as a country that would not have faced the shocks. So for example, if Ebola didn't happen, if commodity prices didn't collapse, so that we started on 6% growth and we're standing on 6 or 7% growth, I can tell you this conversation is happening in a different context. But that's not the context we are now. Growth collapsed to negative 2% in 2016. So we're essentially rebuilding. And UNMIL didn't just leave the physical risk factor. It left the also macroeconomic risk factor, since the departure of UNMIL and the commodity collapse meant that US dollars left the economy and led to the depreciation of the Liberian dollar, which is then exerting a pass-through impact, okay, on inflation. So one of the reasons why inflation has moved precipitously in quite recent time is because of the pass-through on that exchange instability. So it's a multiple complex environment. It's multiple nexuses. You have the nexus of of fragility in the private sector. This is my way I like to see that. The fragility is a function of the absence of deep private sector. When people don't have means to employment, they resort to violence on concession lands. They go and invade, and they claim their rights and they interpose barriers because there's no alternative. So we need to see fragility through the lens of the private sector. And beginning with the ambassador from the Republic of Korea, who began this theme with the private sector, and the ambassador of the UK and other ambassadors who stressed the private sector. This is the way we want to go. So we want to stand on this low economic equilibrium, this new normal, by emphasizing the private sector. As we speak tomorrow, we're convening, the government's convening the banks, the banking sector, the judicial sector, the Chief Justice and all of the judges, the private sector to discuss the legal ramification of access to credit and some of the challenges that banks and the businesses face in Liberia. This is part of the president's reform in the business climate, as the World Bank representative said, on improving our business climate. So access to justice is critical when we look at it from a social perspective, but access to justice for the private sector is also important. It is unfair for banks to loan on the basis of collateral, and when they go to enforce on that collateral, they can't get judgment. So who's going to re-lend in the economy? The president stated that private sector lending was anemic, from 13%, I think, to 13.4% last year. And this is because, for example, the government owes all of the banks around $65 billion, and they're looking to the government to pay. This government doesn't have $65 billion to take from its consolidated account and pay the banks so that they then on-lend to the private sector. So it's a multiple challenge. The nexus of land and the concessionaires, for example, can access the land. We granted Sami Darby and many concessions, for example, around several thousand hectares, and they only access 10% today. Our growth model was that Sami Darby would be able to plant 200,000 hectares, develop 200,000 hectares, so that our growth is higher. They've only been able to do 10%. The other concessionaires as well. We had a wonderful meeting the other day where we all agree, along with all of the private sector actors in the oil palm and agriculture space, that going forward, we're going to take a systematic approach to resolving this issue. We're jointly developing a matrix where they will begin to gain more land and the government will begin to relax some of the challenges. So there's that approach. So I absolutely have you. There's also the domestic resource mobilization nexus. We want to raise more revenue, but raising domestic revenue is also a function of private sector expansion. We sometimes like to forget that. It is true that when we increase our tax effort by closing loopholes, we can raise revenue, but there is a strong upper bound. You hit that ceiling, private sector doesn't grow, you just stay there. While you increase tax effort, you need to continue to expand the economy by relaxing constraints for businesses. So the conversation we just heard around the private sector is on the money. And I just wanted to share that. I also wanted to share the perspective on the regional dimension. The PAPD is a regional plan. Most of the indicators are regionalized. So we're tracking poverty, maternal mortality from a regional lens. So the ambassador, I think it was the ambassador from Japan who made that point. It's an excellent point, and we like to support that. The rate of inflation, the UK ambassador raised that. It's very true. I said that. The central bank and the government are now developing new instruments to really deal with inflation. For example, the bank will be introducing a standard deposit facility that will increase the rate so that banks with excess liquidity can invest that. That's a way of mopping the excess Liberian dollars. By the way, we have a dual currency regime. You have Liberian dollars subsisting alongside United States dollars, and Liberian dollars now, you have fewer US dollars chasing more Liberian dollars. So this is where all this inflation pass-through is coming from. So by through these facilities and the number of instruments we're developing, we believe we will contain the inflation impact. So inflation can begin to move downward until we get it down into single digits. I think so. I mean, the ambassador of Morocco set this thing up. In this context, Liberia has to be viewed differently than other countries that exited conflict, because these countries exited on a higher equilibrium than we're exiting. So it means all of us need to think deep and see how we can diversify the Liberian economy so that development assistance focuses more on the private sector, on private sector sustainability. I think that's right. Think PPPs, for example. How do we get PPPs in Liberia to finance some of the road investments so that we don't pile up new debt stock? The president said, I mean, he's not increased the debt stock, it's around $1 billion, but it could go up to 1.5 to 2 billion if we continue to borrow. We've been conservative in not borrowing because we're exploring possibilities of not risking cash. I think that's so. How do we get PPPs? We're working with partners to develop a PPP framework. I mean, to be honest with you, Africa, the share of money is going through PPP is enormously so tiny in Africa. For example, only about 60 billion, and that's concentrated in around 4 countries: South Africa, Nigeria, and then Uganda and Kenya. They consume a lion's share of PPP investments. How do countries like Sierra Leone, countries like Liberia attract pension funds? So I think all of the partners need to find ways to help the countries like Liberia attract private money to do development. This is the next stage of our coordination as we roll out. So it's not just about it's about how do you get a private sector firm to move in agriculture, for example. Now that we're ratcheting the emphasis on agriculture. So I really like to thank the various ambassadors that spoke to these various themes of private sector. And I'd like to say that I look forward. Let me say, the government of France, a big thank you. France is not a typical country that lends budget support, but they were able to do so. And so in a European context, we see how we feel that the government of France feels several nations here, and they're talking about youth development. So we're looking, as we move for strong partnerships in youth development. We recognize the EU support, we recognize USAID, we recognize the government of France as key partners. USAID support has been critical for domestic resource mobilization. On our tax side, we're looking at the best way to see, are we moving to VAT? I mean, we're doing a lot of work, transshipment hub. We're trying to think outside the box because the challenges are immense, and so the thinking and the creativity have to outpace the challenges. We need to be better planners than we were in the last 5 years because the expectations from our people are humongous. They don't understand, they don't care about the market economics. They care about roads, they care about getting jobs, even if it is difficult. So in this dire context, I think from a national security standpoint, from a peace resilience standpoint, we all need to dig deeper and help Liberia in this new context. I'd just like to end there and say wonderful comments. Thanks, Ambassador, for wonderful comments.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Minister. Ambassador Skoog, I give the floor back to you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the comments on your side very, very much. And I know it's getting late for you, so we'll try to wrap up and to start that. I'd like to just pass the floor to Assistant Secretary General for the Peace Building Support, Mr. Oscar Fernandez Taranco. Please, Oscar.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Skoog. First, let me very warmly welcome the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Minister Findley, in one of the coldest days in New York. You have added warmth to this particular discussion of the Peace Building Commission. To also warmly welcome the many ministers who are present across the screen, to my very good friend and dynamic UN leader, Yaqub El-Hilwa, to all the development partners, to the chair of the Peace Building Commission, to Ambassador Kemaya, and the many members of this particular configuration. One of the reasons I was late to this start of the discussion was that we were having a discussion on the 38th floor with the Secretary General about what lessons have we learned from successful transitions, given the very specific and special attention that the Security Council is placing in getting this right. And certainly here, Sweden and many other member states have played an important role in linking this discussion of the Council with the Peace Building Commission and with you, Honorable Minister, and the many development partners, ambassadors in this room. This is what breathes life to the very pertinent priorities of UN reform, of many reforms of our different and multiple platforms going on. And so therefore, I understand and I could get from the sense of what I was able to hear that you had a very dynamic session. So maybe I would, of all the points I had, I think I would like to come back to the one that is the most elusive and maybe the most difficult point, because all the rest is pretty much aligned right now. But the financing part is the crux of the issue here, I think. And I just heard different references to this. So first, to refer to how important this multi-partner trust fund that has been established precisely to drive government ownership and leadership, to drive coherence, to drive integration, to drive the sense of purpose, immediacy, and priority, how important that mechanism is. And it's important enough that the Peace Building Fund, to the amounts that Yaqub El-Hilwa was just referring to, has decided to align precisely through this mechanism to the national priorities to focus on those ongoing peace-building requirements that are still yet to be met. And these are requirements and necessities that have a medium to long-term sort of focus. I'm not going to go over the different projects we have approved in the context of the peace-building and transition strategy and your pro-poor development plan, but it is very much focused on empowering young people, which I know is the top priority of His Excellency the President, Weah. Also empowering women, but also addressing the very difficult reforms, legislative reforms that need to kick in to precisely enhance a more enabling environment for the private sector, for the development partners, for your neighbors to support Liberia's transition. Many recommendations have been made here, but let me just say that the reason this discussion happens to be quite pertinent is we spent the last 3 years, the last 5 years, trying to reform the way the Peacebuilding Commission is working, the way the Peacebuilding Support Office and the Peacebuilding Fund. We've had twin resolutions of the Security Council, the General Assembly, to actually frame what it is that we, member states, the UN, need to be doing to support in a more coherent manner the member states who are requesting this type of support. So in a way, it is where the rubber hits the road here. It is about, talking, walking, talking the talk, if you will. It is about, putting the aspects of financing front and center, because this was one of the key issues that the multiple reviews have consistently come back to frame, that the lack of predictable, the lack of flexible, the lack of catalytic funding is what tends to be a big challenge in transitional settings, as you are, of course, dealing with. So we have all the other elements in place. We have the enabling environment where the SDGs can be achieved. We have a committed, inclusive leadership. We have a successful transition. We have a strengthened resident coordinator. We have development partners, the World Bank, the Africa Development Bank, the regional organizations in place. But we lack financing, and this is the missing piece right now. And so maybe to thank you, Mr. Chair, for bringing this notion to the attention of the Peacebuilding Commission, because this Peacebuilding Commission and its platform, its diplomatic solidarity partnership platform, can only be as dynamic and as effective as we are actually able to provide this enhancing, dynamizing platform to support national plans such as those that you have presented today. So only to conclude by saying, at least us in the Peacebuilding Support Office, now part of the new Department of Political and Peacebuilding Affairs, will be aligning our contributions to this national plan through the pooled funding mechanism in order to accelerate the achievements of the SDGs and the very important peace-building challenges of reconciliation, dialogue, inclusion, and partnership. So rest assured, Mr. Minister, just to thank you, because you've taken a very long flight to get here to present this program, but just to tell you we are fully committed to this, and just to really commend your leadership, the leadership of the President of Liberia, and the many ministers and many partners who are there to support your efforts. Thank you very much.
Oscar, thank you very much for that contribution. I'd like to offer our Liberian friends in New York the last word, starting with the permanent representative and then maybe the foreign minister. Ambassador Kamaya. Yep.
Thank you very much. His Excellency, Minister Besanga Merton Finlay, Ministers Toure and Olai Collins, Excellencies at home and here in the room, Mrs. Frances Greaves of the National Civil Society of Liberia, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, our international development partners at home and here. Let me join the previous speakers in profoundly thanking His Excellency Ambassador Olufsku, Chair of the Liberia Configuration of the Peacebuilding Commission, for convening such an important and productive meeting. As you are aware, this is for me an inaugural meeting of the Liberia configuration of the Peacebuilding Commission, and it happens in such a grand style, particularly with the presentation of the government of Liberia Pro-Po agenda here at the United Nations headquarters. We want to seize this opportunity to congratulate His Excellency Mr. Guillermo Fernandez de Soto for his preferment as the new chair of the Peacebuilding Commission, the Ambassador of Colombia. On behalf of His Excellency President Weah, I acknowledge with deep appreciation the insightful and thought-provoking interventions from the various speakers. Let me say special thanks to His Excellency Minister Finley, Finance and Development Planning Minister Twe, and Minister Olai Collins of the Ministry of Internal Affairs respectively, for joining us on this auspicious occasion. We couldn't have gotten a better presentation of the highlights of Liberia's development plan as was done by Minister Toye. Excellencies, there are a lot Liberians will remain grateful for, especially as you continually prove your unflinching practical commitment to Liberia, evidenced by the outcome of this meeting. We vividly recall that in our turmoil, the United Nations, particularly the Security Council, and the entire international community stood by us when hostilities ceased. You supported our efforts in consolidating the peace we enjoy today. And when our nation was ravaged by the deadly Ebola pandemic, you did not abandon us. You joined in our fight and ensured that we surmounted the deadly virus. As this was not sufficient, you stood as a colossal partner and helped to guide our historic and democratic transition. And now that we endeavor to spur economic development and further strengthen our peace and address the causation of our conflict, you remain a steadfast and reliable partner. Truly, in retrospection, a great lot has been achieved, particularly considering May 2010, when Liberia was placed on the agenda of the Peacebuilding Commission. Along this difficult journey, the Peacebuilding Fund has been a significant and reliable partner in helping to sustain the peace and to prevent conflict in Liberia. It is no doubt that Liberians are prepared to translate the support of the Peacebuilding Fund into meaningful results, including the deepening of our democracy. You will recall that the Peacebuilding Fund was the first to contribute to the Liberia Multi-Partner Trust Fund when it was launched. And in December 2018, the Peacebuilding Fund approved a support of $5 million United States dollars to fund peacebuilding and reconciliation projects in Liberia. Reconciliation is at the heart of our efforts to sustaining peace. The support of the Peacebuilding Fund has also been directed to Gender and Security Sector National Task Force in Liberia. And proudly, Liberia hosts the largest gender-responsive security sector reform initiative currently supported by the United Nations. And just as UNMIL was outstanding, so is the current United Nations country team. It is indeed a privilege for us to benefit from such valuable support. Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the correlation between peace and sustainable development cannot be overly emphasized. Against this background, and including many other factors, the visionary President of the Republic of Liberia, His Excellency Dr. George Manneh Weah, was wise in proposing and crafting Liberia's flagship National Development Agenda, dubbed the Pro-Po Agenda for Prosperity and Development, that will address these critical concerns. An agenda with a decentralized, people-centered approach. We are glad to state that the United Nations 2030 Agenda was used as a reference point and a guiding instrument for the development of Liberia's Pro-Po Agenda. Liberia's Pro-Po Agenda, just presented at the UN headquarters by Minister Twe, present realities, Liberia's Pro-Po Agenda, just presented here at the UN headquarters by Minister Twe, in view of present realities, requires the allocation of approximately United States $6.2 billion over a 5-year period. In view of present realities, we will need comprehensive support from our international and development partners to implement the National Development Plan and ensure continuity to the security sector reform efforts in Liberia. And this is very crucial for the realization of long-term peace and stability for our country. We crave your support for Liberia's Pro-Po Agenda in every way humanly possible. Let today be the beginning of new things that are to happen in our great country. Let today be the renewal and actualization of your continued support to initiatives aimed at solidifying the peace and advancing development in Liberia, thereby sustaining the restoration of hope to the people of Liberia. We look forward to the United Nations promise in strengthening the Resident Coordinator's Office, noting that this office is expected to work on building partnerships with political and civil society networks and with relevant ministries and agencies of the Liberian government as well as the international community. We are happy for the further commitments to the Liberia Multi-Partner Trust Fund. We trust that the support to this fund will prove beneficial in the implementation of Liberia's peace-building priorities. We have heard on countless occasions that Liberia is an important example of what sustaining peace means in practice, and that UNMIL will be a model of United Nations peacekeeping. This is certainly welcoming news, but we want to go beyond this. We want to talk about massive achievements of Liberia, post-conflict and post-peacekeeping. We want to showcase the outcome of being a resilient nation, a nation that would be truly reconciled and will erase every semblance of conflict, a nation fully prepared to dispense peace and not a host of peacekeeping operations, a nation whose rebirth will be an inspiration to many other nations. This is how we envisage the new Liberia under the leadership of His Excellency President Weah. And these are what the Pro-Po agenda is set to achieve. This is why, Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, if Liberia is to realize all these inspirations, we will again rely on the continued support of the international and development partners of Liberia, as much as we look to the dynamic leadership of His Excellency President Weah and the political will of the government of Liberia. There is an adage in Liberia which says, when someone is helping you to scratch your back, you should make an effort in scratching your front. In short, in view of the assistance we have received, we too, as a country, have made strides in addressing some critical concerns aimed at spurring the needed reforms, including but not limited to the following: the reduction and standardization of salaries for ministers of the Liberian government and heads of autonomous agencies, the signing into law of the Land Rights Act and the Local Government Act, respectively, as a further means of addressing the root causes of our conflict. About 20 community roads have received asphalt pavements. Announcement by His Excellency President Weah of free tuition for all undergraduate students at all the public universities in the Republic of Liberia. We also look forward to signing into law, among several others, the following acts: the Domestic Violence Act and the Abdullah Kamara Act of Press Freedom, which will protect people from crimes such as criminal libel against the president, sedition, and criminal malevolence. Finally, Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, there is an urgent need for the launching of the National Security Strategy of Liberia. We need to strategize with the United Nations Security Sector Reform to bring this to fruition. Gleaning from the successful engagement and projects of the Peace Building Fund in supporting security sector reform process in the Gambia and Burkina Faso, we could certainly look to the Peace Building Fund for similar support for our national security strategy. These projects could be replicated in Liberia. We can now begin to contemplate on the formulation of a 3 to 5 year project on security sector reform supported by the Peace Building Reform. I extend thanks very much for your continued support and look forward to working with you all in the actualization of our endeavors. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador, and Mr. Minister, please, you have the floor.
Well, thank you, Ambassador Skook, and let me thank Minister Toe, Finance, and all the folks in Liberia, and your team for the work you've done thus far in promoting the Pro-Po agenda. I want to say to you, Ambassador Skook, and all of the ambassadors here, Your Excellencies, and Liberia, that our objective of peace building and development is to improve the lives of our people, that they will be able to feed their families, clothe their families, educate their families, house their families. That is what development is all about. We look forward to your support in supporting the pro-poor agenda in Liberia. And we want to add that peace building in Liberia continues to be a priority. We have been able to accomplish peacekeeping. We've ended that. Liberia is still a fragile country, and we look forward to your support. His Excellency Dr. George Mainawia have asked me, along with the Finance Minister and the Minister of Internal Affairs, to convey to you his ongoing and willingness to work along with the United Nations to find solutions to problems that Liberia is faced with. We can only hope and pray that your support will continue in Liberia. I want to thank all of you for today. Thank you.
Mr. Minister, thank you very much for those words, which I think are very apt in summing up today's meetings. I want to thank everyone for their participation, not least ministers and high representatives in Monrovia and the minister who's traveled here. I think, very briefly, I think we've all understood the context. Mr. Minister of Finance, you were very clear about the context, which we understand now, I think better, the triple fragilities that have been mentioned. I think we all see that the plan of pro-poor agenda that we have has been presented to us today sets out the right priorities. The way I've listened in on the meeting today, almost everyone who spoke has welcomed the four strands set out in that plan. That is a good news, and I think the fact that all players who have expressed themselves today have said that their efforts are aligned with the main pillars of that plan. I think another very good news today is to feel the energy and the ownership of the government in moving this agenda forward. And I think we all understand that in order to be successful, there needs to be an accompaniment, and much of that spells out as resources. There is a fixation sometimes, I think, here in New York to look only at what the UN is doing. That is important in itself, and it needs to be importantly stressed and supported. But I think, colleagues, all around the table here, you are members of this configuration because each and every one of you, also on a national basis, are committed, we hope, to supporting Liberia. So the way we do that is we try to provide to the funds that are there to work as bilateral donors, but also to make sure that our support, sharing experiences from other contexts. We've heard from Korea, Colombia, and others today, Bangladesh. But also to make sure that our action is well coordinated as a group, but also individually, that we act in alignment, what we do in the World Bank, what we do in Liberia, what we do here in New York. So thanks very much. We will adjourn the meeting here. And of course, I understand that with the chair comes a huge responsibility in channeling all that goodwill into concrete support to our friends in Liberia. Thank you very much, everyone. The meeting is adjourned.